Hey everyone, welcome to Moving Matt. We do all things cameras with a dash of vlogs and a little bit of travel. And today I'm going to be giving my picks for the top 5 best cameras of 2021. And the cool thing about this list is I've never used these cameras.
Wait a tick.
Okay, so I know a lot of you will have problems with me making this video, considering I never used any one of these cameras. But this is kind of going to be a video not just about necessarily which is the best camera, but kind of which ones impressed me the most based upon at least the spec sheets and all the reviews that I've seen for them, and also if these cameras lived up to the expectations and surprised me. So without further ado, let's get into it. So at number 5, I have the Sony A7 IV. So if you were to go back probably at the beginning of this year and we kind of knew that the Sony A7 IV at least should be coming in 2021, I would have probably put this as like my number 1 most anticipated camera. I expected a whole lot out of this camera, and well, in some ways it disappointed, but once you start looking at the spec sheet of this camera, it is a very worthy follow-up to the A7 III, even though it's not quite as revolutionary. They bumped up the megapixel count from 24 to 33, and they were still able to keep the same speed that they had in the A7 III. They also added 10-bit 4K 60, even though it has that APS-C crop, and even though that part was a bit of a bummer, the 4K 30 is downsampled from 7K, making it very crisp. Also, they added all the color profiles that they had in their higher end cameras, like the Sony Alpha 1 and the A7S III, as well as giving great autofocus and bumping that up quite a bit, especially over the A7 III, and even added the animal eye AF in video, something that has not been brought to the A7S III at this time. So it is definitely a big leg up, and they did all this adding great ergonomics and adding a new dial that I think should be added to all the other cameras moving forward, and of course giving the improved menus, which is a big boost over the A7 III, and that is why it makes my number 5 spot. Coming in at number 4 is the Fujifilm GFX 100S. So this camera is very affordable when it comes to medium format. It is only $6,000, and I know I said only, like $6,000 is very expensive, but considering that it's big brother that kind of doesn't even have some of the features that this one does, it definitely doesn't have the ergonomics that this camera does, is $10,000. In comparison, it makes it seem like a really good deal and puts it right in line with the high-end full-frame cameras. So this is a camera that probably more than any other camera has made me interested in medium format. I'm not necessarily thinking I'm going to switch over to that anytime soon, because I definitely still see this as a primarily stills camera, and I'm a little bit more of a video guy, but I do think that there's definitely a future there, and I'm glad that Fujifilm is deciding to make more affordable medium format cameras, and I hope that it's going to start competing with full frame a little bit more. And I think it's really smart that Fujifilm is kind of in a lane of their own. So it's definitely a cool camera and was a very welcome surprise in 2021, and that's why it takes my number 4 spot. Now coming in at number 3 is the Canon EOS R3. While this camera definitely feels like a placeholder camera to hold people off until the R1, it still brought with it some very impressive specs. I loved the eye tracking autofocus. I think that is a very interesting and unique technology, and it'll be interesting to see how it evolves in the future. This has lightning fast autofocus. It is a very fast camera, shooting 30 frames per second, and even though the megapixel count isn't up there with the other flagships, a lot of wildlife and sports photographers will tell you that that's a really good file size for that type of photography, especially considering you need to file through a lot of different images. Having a smaller file size is actually not that much of a negative. Also, the body is a great homage to cameras like the 1DX, but in a sleeker, smaller package that seems very modern. So even though this camera seems like a bit of a teaser for the R1, I definitely think it has some great technology, and that's why it makes my number 3 spot. Coming in at number 2 is the Nikon Z9. So the Nikon Z9 kind of came out of nowhere. At least it came out of nowhere considering that Nikon has been kind of like in third place solidly for a while, especially when it comes to autofocus and just the overall general sentiment around Nikon. A lot of people haven't had as much buzz around Nikon for a while, especially in the mirrorless market. So this camera was a very big welcome, especially for Nikon shooters. It is a very fast camera. It is a very hefty camera, but it also has some incredible video features, which is a big plus for me, or at least is something that I am the most interested in. It has 8K 30 that is pretty much unlimited. They're also supposed to be adding 8K 60, which is absolutely insane. It has a really cool feature that allows you to bring down the image to 11 megapixels and get 120 frames per second, doing all that with the autofocus, which is absolutely insane. And speaking of autofocus, this definitely stepped it up and put it right in line with Canon and Sony, and it also did so while adding a lot of different things that it can track that even Sony and Canon can't track at the moment. And it does all this in one mode, which I think is a very big benefit, and I think is something very interesting for the future and something that I hope Sony and Canon adopt. Honestly, if this camera had came out more in 2021, this would probably be making the #1 spot, but considering the last I heard this is shipping out on December 24th, it's hard to really even consider this a 2021 camera. It really hasn't been out in the field long enough to be tried and true. I'm sure there's going to be some kinks that they have to work out. Even though the reviews were very positive, there's nothing like real world experience for people to get out there and use this for a long period of time. But the spec sheet buzz and boost it's given to Nikon was too much to not add it to this list, but it keeps it from the #1 spot, which goes to the Sony Alpha 1. So the Sony Alpha 1 has been out in 2021 for a while now. It shoots 30 frames per second RAW, making it the fastest, highest megapixel camera on this list. It also has very impressive video features as well, shooting 8K 30, and it also does so with an impressive dynamic range, even better than the A7 III, at least according to Gerald Undone, who's probably forgotten more about cameras than I'll ever know. It also has very impressive 4K, especially considering it's using pixel binning. Whatever technology they're using in that camera, I hope they bring it to future cameras. I would love to see it in a possible update to the Sony A7 IV to add full frame 4K 60, but I wouldn't necessarily hold our breath on that one. It also does all that in a very small and compact body, and personally I'm a fan of that, especially considering you can add the extra battery pack if you want the extra batteries and also the extra size. So I definitely think that this is a very impressive camera. It's a bit pricey compared to the other flagships and also has that terrible cheap screen. I'm not going to go into it here because this is about celebrating cameras, and the Sony Alpha 1 is a very impressive camera. All of these cameras are very impressive in their own way. I think it's a great time to be a photographer or a videographer or just a camera lover. There's a lot of interesting technology out there, and I'm very excited to see where it goes in the future. But that is just my opinions and my thoughts on this year's cameras. Drop in the comment section below and let me know, do you agree with this list? Is your list completely different? Is there something you could change? Is there a camera you would take off this list and add? Let me know all that down below. If you've liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And until next time, peace.